Okay, we're rolling.
All right, this is an interview at the New York State Military Museum, Saratoga Springs, New York. It is the 26th of September, 2006, approximately 10:30 a.m. Interviewers are Mike Russert and Wayne Clark. Could you give me your full name, date of birth, place of birth, please?
Name is Joseph J. Taluto. Place of birth is Rochester, New York, on 12 December 1947.
Okay. What is your title now?
I am the Adjutant General of the state of New York.
Okay. When did you enter service and where?
I entered service in October of 1965 in Schenectady, New York. Joined the 727 Maintenance Company in Schenectady.
Okay. You enlisted at that time?
I enlisted at that time. Remained an enlisted person for up to 3 years. I entered OCS in 1967. Graduated, commissioned in 1968.
Did you go through ESMA?
I went through the Empire State Military Academy, yes
Okay.
I did.
Okay. After you left there in 1968, what was your assignment?
My first assignment was as a shop leader in a maintenance company in Gloversville, actually, as a lieutenant after commissioning, and so I served there for a period of time in the Gloversville maintenance unit.
Okay. Why did you decide to enlist?
Well, most of that was my father's doing and his encouragement. He was a lifelong guardsman. He had entered World War II, served with the 90th Division overseas. When he came home, he joined the Guard, and he always thought that the Guard was a lifesaver for him. He felt it was a great organization, and that it was, he came back from the war. He ended up working for the National Guard as one of those early technicians. And when I got of age, he was very anxious for me to get in the Guard, because he thought I was a good candidate for it, because I was maybe having too good a time in high school, and he felt that the discipline was good, and it was something that I could fall back on. So it was like manifest destiny. It was almost like it was meant to be. As much as I tried to resist the idea that I would follow in his footsteps as a full-time person in the National Guard, it evolved that way.
Was he an officer also?
He was a warrant officer. You know, he was overseas as enlisted. So when I got in, it was shortly thereafter, you know, within a couple of years, and he started persuading me to go to OCS, because that wasn't my idea either. So he encouraged me to get into Guard. Let's use the word encourage. He encouraged me to go to OCS, said that if I was going to be in, then I ought to be an officer, and so on and so forth. So those two things put me on a path that led to my eventually going to work for the National Guard full-time. And the rest is history. Going to be 41 years here in another 30 days.
Okay. Now I noticed, well, we got this off my mind. You went into the Defense Artillery Officer Basic Course. What does that mean, Defense Artillery?
Air Defense Artillery. I was, as a guardsman, working, you know, you went to OCS, was assigned out there as a, you know, as a traditional soldier, but I succumbed to the idea that I was going to work in the program, because I decided to get married, and I decided to go to work, and I ended up working at the Division of Military and Naval Affairs. Well, what's interesting about this story is my first job at the Division of Military and Naval Affairs was state grade 3, which is as low as you can get, and I was a clerk typist. And now I'm the adjutant general of the state of New York. So, and work at the M&A, of course, as the head of the National Guard. So what I tell everybody at the M&A is when I was a clerk typist, I was extremely good. But having said that, I worked at the M&A, started in 1968, right after I got out of OCS, and worked my way up the state grade pay salary to state grade 7, and I was making about $136 every 2 weeks.
Now, was that at the state campus?
That was at the state campus at Building 22 then, and so that was my beginning, but it wasn't a very healthy salary.
Mhm.
And as an officer, I was more ambitious and wanted to have more responsibility and make more money.
Mhm.
And the air defense program at that time, the National Guard was involved in air defense artillery. Had a Nike Hercules sites down in the New York metropolitan area, and there was an opening, and it was a huge jump in salary for me to go. It was a federal job, not a state job, and I decided to take that job. I was a lieutenant, launcher platoon leader. Moved my family down to Long Island, and that's how I got into the federal program in 1970, and of course that was the beginning of a federal career in civil service that went from 1970 to 2001. And so as a lieutenant, I went into the air defense program. I had to go to do the basic course, so to be qualified. So I became qualified in Nike Hercules system full-time, platoon leader. Great assignment, learned a lot, got to lead troops on a base, and responsible for missiles with nuclear weapons and nuclear warheads, I should say, and in a very important full-time work. So that set me up well, and from there, the Nike Hercules program was going to phase out because the threat of manned enemy bombers was subsiding, and so there was a transition in the works, and I ended up looking for another position in the Capital District area, which was my home, where my parents lived and all, and wanted to move back there. It's where I joined the Armor Battalion, and then that took a lieutenant's position there, became a captain in the 210th Armor, went to the Armor Officer Basic Course, became an Armor Officer, and remained so for the rest of my career. That I was in that battalion for 8 years, pretty much assumed every position in there that one could do in the 210th Armor. Moved along from the Armor Battalion into a pretty unique unit called the 27th Rear Area Operations Center, which was only 7 or 8 RAOCs, as they call them, in the Army National Guard, in the whole inventory of the United States Army. So that was a great assignment because we got to be affiliated with 18th Airborne Corps, and I learned a lot going to Fort Bragg and working with the 1st COSCOM and the people at Fort Bragg, and many exercises and pretty high speed. The Rear Area Operations Center was a kind of G3 operations for the for the core rear area. Today we don't, in asymmetric warfare, we don't have these kinds of boundaries anymore, so we've transitioned from there. From the RAOC, I went to the Troop Command, became which is a kind of a division, brigade, division level headquarters that was a command and control headquarters, was the G3, became the Chief of Staff, and then I transitioned in 1990 42nd Division moved up to the Capital District area, and that's where I became the Chief of Staff of the 42nd, and that's where I began my affiliation with the division. And remained there from December of 1989 all the way through 2006, with only one other assignment in there for a couple of years where I was the Joint Force Headquarters Chief of Staff at the DM&A. So I had 3 assignments at DM&A: clerk typist, Chief of Staff, and the Adjutant General. So all spread out with many other years in between. That's a fast wrap up of 41 years right there.
Okay. Now, would you talk about, I guess, first of all, being with the Joint Task Force Commander with the World Trade Center crisis and what happened
Right,
then?
and I was fortunate enough to get promoted to general officer in 2000, and I was the deputy commander of the 42nd Division. We were preparing for a division level warfighter, and we were scheduled for an irregular rotation that they take the divisions through. And we happened to be in Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, at the seminar portion of this brigade or division warfighter exercise. And the seminar is a week-long event where you prepare yourself for the actual CPX. We arrived down there on the 8th of September. So it was obviously a Tuesday morning. We were in our classroom having a presentation from the people at Fort Leavenworth when I got word of the attacks on the World Trade Center. Of course, the seminar was brought to a halt. The division commander at that time, Tom Garrett, and I discussed going back with a small team to New York to get ready to go assist our state in recovery operations. We made some phone calls back to New York, and they certainly wanted to get us back in town. And I left with about 7 other guys in a van and drove 22 hours back to the armory. We got back, and after a short rest,
What armory was that?
in Glenmore Road at the division headquarters.
Okay.
We made a visit up to the state headquarters, kind of got the lowdown on what was happening, and immediately prepared to take our tactical command post down to New York City. And so I went down and met with then the initial response team down there, got kind of briefed up on where they were at. We had plans to expand our response and all that business down there. And about 7 to 10 days after September 11th, we deployed down there and took control of the National Guard response. And I was the commander, the initial commander on that task force. And that task force grew from about 500 to close to 2,500. And it was not just Army National Guard, there was Air National Guard, our Naval Militia, Marine Corps Reserve, and our New York Guard State Volunteer Force, all involved to come up with a 2,500-man task force.
Now, what was your headquarters site at that
Our
time?
headquarters site was at Park Avenue, which was the 7th Regiment Armory, better known as 7th Regiment Armory. We had a forward command post, tactical, at Battery Park. So I had a brigade operational headquarters down at Battery Park. And the main effort for the National Guard response was at the Park Avenue Armory. And we got organized and got more established, and of course the logistics of just keeping 2,500 troops in the New York metropolitan area, rotating every 2 weeks, was fairly challenging. But our work down there was extremely important, and our airmen, sailors, soldiers, and Marines did a great job. We worked security. We worked a lot of administrative processes in helping with badging and access to the area. We worked logistics. We warehoused, did a lot of warehousing, a lot of transportation work, taking things to and from. So the Guard response was pretty robust and good work. And so from that very significant event in our country's history, I was asked just a couple weeks ago, we were at the World Trade Center on its 5th anniversary. I was asked by someone in the media, you know, had my life changed since 9/11? And of course, without question, it did, and what unfolded for me personally after that. And I'm not sure that there isn't any American that you know, can't say that their life changed after 9/11. My personal story there, after the events of 9/11, I retired from my civil service job, and as a federal employee member, I said that I was full-time in the National Guard. I completed 35 years of federal service in October 2001, and I retired from the civil service part, but I remained as a National Guardsman. I remained active as the deputy commander of the division. I stayed in the city for a couple of months running the task force, and then I turned the task force over to General Garrett, who came down to do a stint, relieved me. And after a very short period of time at home, I accepted an assignment to Forces Command, which is our Army's Force Generation Headquarters. The ForceCom Headquarters is the one that is responsible for training the peacetime Army and then deploying units overseas as required by the combatant commanders. With all of the mobilizations that began shortly after 9/11, and with our response and our attack on Afghanistan and taking down the Taliban regime, Forces Command started to have to push out a lot of reserve components, and they decided that they needed a one-star National Guard officer at the Forces Command headquarters to assist and support them, you know, with the workload in turning out National Guard and reserve units. So I was not the first one in that assignment. There were actually two before me, but they were, you know, 90-day to 120-day assignments, and I accepted, and so I went to Atlanta, and I worked in Atlanta from February of 2002 there until about the end of June, you know, the 1st of July. I was asked to extend down there in that assignment, but I declined because I was nominated to become the division commander, which was, you know, something I didn't really expect, but that came about, and so in 2002, late in 2002, someplace in October, I assumed command of the 42nd Division.
Was your father still living at that time?
No, my father unfortunately passed away back in 1972. I was in the Air Defense Program and had just transitioned back to the Armor Battalion, and it was in that period of time in 1972 he passed away, so he knew I made captain. That was about it. What he knows now, you know, we don't know. But getting back to assuming command of the division, great honor. great legacy of the 42nd Division. And we were going to prepare a small task force to command and control troops in the Balkans. We were up for a rotation in the Balkans, known as S4, K4, and it was a 2-star command, and I thought that I was going to have a chance to go over and command and control a task force in the Balkans, but they downsized it to a 1-star command, the rotation before us, so it was going to be one of our deputies that was going to get to deploy with the task force to the Balkans. So as things start rolling along, we're now into 2003, and we are starting to ramp ourselves up for the Balkans rotation in late 2004. And at the very end of 2003, there was rumblings that there was consideration for a National Guard division to be deployed to Operation Iraqi Freedom. By that time, we had taken down, in March, I think, of 2003, had taken down the Ba'athist regime in Iraq, and they were setting up rotations 2 and 3, and the rumor was out that they were going to take a National Guard division over there. There was a process that went over the holiday period from 2003 to 2004, and I knew that the 42nd was being considered as one of the divisions. There are 8 National Guard divisions at this time and still are in the National Guard, and 4 of those divisions were not in consideration because either they were in the Balkans rotation, had just returned from the Balkans rotation, so some divisions were eliminated, but there was, I think 3 or 4 divisions that were being considered. All said and done, I knew we were in consideration, and on the 14th of February, Valentine's Day 2004, the phone rang at my house. It was actually the general officer that I worked for at Forces Command some 2 years earlier, because remember I said Forces Command were the ones that were generating forces. He called me up and said, "Congratulations, the 42nd Division is being selected for this rotation, and you'll be going to Iraq in an Operation Iraqi Freedom 3. And so that now begins the unbelievable event of alert mobilization and deployment to Iraq, and as a 2-star National Guard general officer, quite an honor and privilege to get to do this. First National Guard division commander, or any commander that was going to be committed to combat since Korea, and to my knowledge, the first National Guard commander to command active duty troops since World War II. And so we were going to make some history in this deployment, and it became a very busy time in my life. And so in May of 2004, I, on the 2nd of May 2004, entered federal service and began building what would be known as Task Force Liberty. And the 42nd Division headquarters was the divisional headquarters, and of course we were going to command and control 4 brigades in north central Iraq, 2 of which would be active duty brigades from the 3rd Division, and 2 National Guard brigades. The division base would be all 42nd. That would be the Aviation Brigade, the Division Artillery, the Engineer Brigade, and small organizations like the MP Battalion, Signal Battalion, things like that. We're all 42nd based. We brought the components of the 42nd Division base onto active duty between May, June, and July, and we mobilized at Fort Drum and Fort Dix. The division headquarters was located at Fort Drum and mobilized there, along with the division artillery headquarters, the engineer brigade headquarters, the signal battalion, the MI battalion, groups like that. And at Fort Dix, we had the aviation brigade assembled at Fort Dix, and the division support command, which was a very large group. And our mobilization lasted 5 months. On our training, our post-mobilization training lasted 5 months. Culminated in September with a mission rehearsal exercise, which was successfully completed in September, and we were ready for.
What do you mean by that?
A mission rehearsal exercise was just the final validation that you were ready to do what you were going to be doing. It was a very robust and intense CPX conducted by Fort Leavenworth, and we were put through our paces there for a mission rehearsal exercise. You know, showing that we had the capabilities to do our command control mission and had all our systems fleshed out. It's the last rehearsal before you go into your deployment. Now, during this period of time, I had been to Iraq in 2004 3 times. So I actually made a trip. My first trip to the country of Iraq was in June of '04. And then I went back in July. I met with the 1st Division Commanding General, Major General John Batiste, who was the 1st Division was in north central Iraq, and they were the ones that we were going to relieve in place. So we made several trips over to do recons and to make decisions about where we were going to put certain organizations and troops. And they were extremely helpful. The 1st Division was extremely helpful, and the trips were extremely helpful. We made one final trip after a mission rehearsal exercise, and so got some R&R in October. We went back. We started deploying troops in November, at the early phases of our task force, and we went back in December for a final relief in place rehearsal with the 1st Division on exactly how we would take approximately 24 troops out, or 24,000 troops out, and put 24,000 troops in. Not an easy piece of work, but a relief in place that needed to be planned and phased and done right. And then I returned home for a very short period of time, and on the 20th of December, I deployed to Iraq for which would be nearly a year, but almost a year to the day before I returned. Got over there on the 20th of December, and we began the process of the Relief in Place program with the 1st Division, phasing our brigades in and taking their brigades out. And that turnover occurred over a month period of time. There was a slight delay in us taking command in north central Iraq because there was an election in Iraq. It was scheduled to happen in December, and we were scheduled to take command in January, immediately after the election. The election got pushed back 30 days, and so they delayed the relief in place because the 1st Division had all of the requirements covered for the election with all the security forces that had to be put out there and stuff. So the commander in theater decided to delay our change of command over there until February. And so it was after the election. So, if you remember right, on the 14th of February, I get the phone call. And on the 14th of February, we had a change of command in Iraq, 1 year exactly to the day. So, kind of coincidental there. It wasn't planned, obviously, at all. But that was it. We were in charge in north central Iraq in February 2005, so this odyssey from 9/11, for me personally, goes from being retired from federal civil service, being a deputy commander, thinking that I would retire from the National Guard, to becoming the division commander, thinking that he was going to send a small task force to Bosnia. Turns out it takes a division-sized 23,000 troops and goes to Iraq, and find myself there in you know, shortly there, 3.5 years later. We had, as I mentioned previously, 2 brigades from 3rd Division, 1st and 3rd Brigades of the 3rd Division with us. And we had a brigade from Idaho, the 116th Brigade, and the 278th Brigade from Tennessee. What is kind of interesting about Task Force Liberty, which we were known as, was that just like our forefathers in the 42nd Division, we were that original division, World War I, made up of 26 states with regiments, 4 regiments, one from Iowa, one from New York, one from Alabama, and one from Ohio. We had, you know, 2 active duty brigades and 2 National Guard brigades, one from Tennessee, one from Idaho, one from Georgia, Fort Benning, and one from Fort Stewart. And with a whole bunch of other National Guard units attached to us and United States Army Reserve units attached to us in that task force, we were made up of 29 states. So we were living up to our name, the Rainbow Division, which General MacArthur coined back in World War I when the division was formed, that the division stretched across the country like a rainbow because it included so many states, 26 in World War I. We lived up to our legacy there with 29 states and in the 42nd and in Task Force Liberty. We were located in north central Iraq. We were headquarters in Tikrit, Iraq, which was Saddam Hussein's hometown. And in fact, our headquarters was at his presidential palace in Tikrit, a sprawling palace complex, 146 buildings, a very large piece of property that he used for his family and friends only, not for the good of the Iraqi people. And at the end of our tour, we were the last major U.S. unit to use the presidential palace. We actually were able to turn it over to the Iraqi people when we left. And our successor that came in was the 101st, who relieved us and took on the next rotation, was located at another base north of Tikrit. MND North Central, Multinational Division North Central, Task Force Liberty's area, where the 42nd Command and controlled the Task Force Liberty, was a very diverse area, size of West Virginia. Had Sunni population that was fairly significant in one of the 4 provinces that we had charge of, in Saladin province, mostly 80% Sunni. We had Al-Tamin province, which is mostly Kurdish province, so we had the Kurdish influence. And then we had Al-Sulaymaniyah, which is also Kurd, and Diyala province, which was a mix of Shia and Sunni and Kurd. So MND North Central was extremely large, size of West Virginia. Can't remember how many square miles, we knew that at one time. And very diverse. Sunni, Shia, Arab, Kurdish mix. And while on our watch, we were responsible for trying to turn some of this over to Iraqi security forces, which we were able to do. We were very prideful in the fact that we On our watch, we were able to train 2 Iraqi divisions, the 4th and the 5th. We've got several units within those divisions to assume battle space in north central Iraq. We were able to either close or turn over 10 bases to the Iraqis, which was a significant downsizing of the U.S. footprint in north central Iraq. And we were able to off-ramp one of the 4 brigades at the conclusion of our tour, which again was downsizing. So we believe that we continued the good work of the 1st Division that preceded us, made some substantial progress in Iraq, had a referendum election in October there, where they came out and voted for their constitution. We were able to make a lot of progress in provincial government operations, and some inroads in security. And certainly there were security concerns when we left. And we turned over the north central portion of Iraq to the 101st in better condition than what we found it, which was, I think, the mark of success of being able just to move the ball downfield, or however you want to say it, just improve the situation to the point where shortly after we left and 101st took over, they actually did turn the battle space over to the 4th Division and the 5th Division that we instituted. So north central Iraq has progressed quite well, and we were very instrumental in that. Being in the lineup with the Big Red One and the Screaming Eagles on either side of us, I think added to our own esteem and legacy in the 42nd Division, being in a lineup with 2 tremendous Army organizations such as those. We felt very fulfilled when we redeployed back. We lost 84 great Americans during our time there, and several wounded, but I think all of our leaders and commanders over there did magnificent work. And we still remain close, obviously, as you would imagine, to this day, both with the active duty folks and the National Guard folks. And so the history of having a National Guard commander command active duty forces initially was kind of a big deal, but probably within 2 weeks people stopped asking that question, because we were just basically all engaged in getting our work done. And at the end of the day, the National Guard is a component of the Army, but it is part of the Army. The National Guard, of course, has additional missions here at home, which we're very proud of. But we're also there as primarily now an operational reserve for our Army, and ready to perform in the warfight when necessary, to whatever level that the powers to be want to do it. So we're very proud of being able to add to the 42nd's history. We're very proud of being able to make a contribution to the global war on terrorism. And we got a lot of great memories, a lot of great relationships were made in that effort. That's the chronological rundown.
Do you think your mission in Iraq was clearly defined to you?
It was. Our mission statement was to conduct stability operations along 4 lines of operation, and clearly we were, there still was a offensive combat element to that, because we had an insurgency growing there. But stability operations does have an aspect of offensive operations to it. And we had a very clear, measurable way ahead. For example, like I mentioned, developing and growing Iraqi security forces. That was very measurable. What did we accomplish there? Downsizing the U.S. footprint in MND North Central. we had, you know, only 17 bases were closed during OIF 3, and the 42nd closed 10, okay, of those bases. So, I mean, that's real progress. We had provincial governments established, elected governors of provinces, councils formed, provincial councils, city governments established, some aspect of law and order. Yes, there was an insurgency there, but from a standpoint of making progress along that continuum in the 4 lines of operations, which were security, governance, communicating, and economic. And of course, we did a whole bunch of things on the economic side of the house. So we had a clear vision of what we needed to get done, and the fact is, it was measurable progress as compared to, you know, saying the mission. Of course, getting the Iraqis to be self-sufficient and standing up their own government, that is not going to be done on one rotation. And we knew that going in, but we knew that in order to make a contribution to the eventual outcome of that, these were the steps. I mean, we had 3 elections in Iraq, and we were there for 2 of them. And then very successful elections, I might say.
Did you have you had to have contact with the local people? What were the relationships like between your men, yourself, and the local people?
Well, at the leader level, we had wonderful relationships. Great relationships with the Iraqi division commanders, brigade commanders, battalion commanders. I knew them. We worked together. We socialized together. We talked, and our units worked together. So there was quite a good relationship between U.S. and Iraqi forces. I had wonderful relationships with the governors of each province, and the elected leaders. We had councils. I had good relationships with many of the tribal leaders in north central Iraq, the sheikhs that were community leaders and part of the government. Our relationships down into the community were inhibited by security, security problems. The fact that some of the people felt threatened by hanging out with U.S. forces or establishing relationships with U.S. forces that could eventually be used against them and threatening their families. It's funny, our impression was they wanted very much to embrace us. And again, they did embrace us at those levels that I just described. But it wasn't like you can go down, into the community and sit amongst the people, the common, ordinary, non-governmental, non-military leaders and break bread very easily. But the fact is that they would have loved to do that had there not been an insurgency and people who were just opposed to the regime being taken down or whatever other reasons they had.
Do you think your troops were adequately prepared for what they met there?
I do. We were well trained. We were well equipped for what we had to do. One of the things that I have always said is that the National Guard and USAR, what we brought to the fight was a great deal of maturity and experience. And for example, if you take a squad leader or a platoon sergeant, I should say, in the Army, you're going to find a young man that probably is not married, hasn't had a job, joined the Army, out of school, high school, or may not even have college finished at this point. Whereas the counterpart in the reserves is probably is married, probably has had a job, and is probably 4 to 5 years older. Also has a civilian skill. We have law enforcement officers, very helpful in helping work with the Iraqi police. We had civil engineers, very helpful when you have, you know, things like water treatment and infrastructure that was in the 1950s vintage. Yet we had many people that were extremely helpful with, you know, bringing those civilian skills along with your soldier skills. I had always said that Task Force Liberty was an extremely diverse and very powerful task force because of the mix between reserve and active. You know, our active component counterparts, you know, they brought, you know, stability operations experience from the Balkans. Certainly we were with the 3rd Division, who had already been to Iraq. They were on their 2nd rotation, many of those soldiers. So they had that experience, and then coupled with the reserve components experience with their civilian skills and their soldier skills as well, I mean, made us a very strong task force, and that was very evident. And there's a lot of examples of that.
How do you think, with Iraq, Afghanistan, there's been a lot of strain on the National Guard. How do you envision your role as the Adjutant General in this time of change in the Guard's role?
Yeah, by the way, another job I didn't expect. Coming off of my division command experience, I didn't expect to be the Adjutant General. My predecessor retired, and so here I am. And now I'm in a position where the Adjutant General is a force provider and, you know, maintains the readiness of the National Guard, and of course is answerable to the governor to support our state missions. But yeah, we have to keep our troops sharp and focused and ready to continue to serve. And these are challenging times. The tempo is high. The Army is being asked to carry a tremendous load, and they are not going to be able to do it without the National Guard and Reserve support. So as the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq and just business as usual continue to move down the road, you know, we're going to have to continue to provide forces. The fact is that we have young men and women that are joining our ranks, that want to do something for their country, and they're choosing the National Guard as a way of doing that. And so we are going to have to work hard on our recruiting and our retention to keep some of the veterans that we do have, and to keep our forces as robust as possible, so that, you know, we're capable of working this for the long haul. So that's a major issue for the Adjutant General, for leaders in New York, is to keep our units at full strength and ready to answer the call if needed again. And I mean, I say if needed again, when needed again, is actually what it's turning out to be.
Do you find that morale is still high in the Guard?
I think it is. You know, from what I see, I think the veteran soldiers that have come back feel very good about what they've been able to accomplish and what they're doing. This is a high time for the National Guard. We're in the war fight, and we're doing quite well. We're making a great contribution. They feel good about that. We're here at home. We're responding to natural disasters, as we always have, aka 55,000 troops respond to Katrina. We have flooding here in our own state. We supported that just recently, and of course we're always there for that kind of stuff. We've sent troops to the border for the President's request on the southern border to support our border patrol. New York National Guard has contributed to that. We'll contribute more to that in this upcoming year. And of course we work Homeland Security. Day in and day out, have a standing task force in New York City of 300 troops. So the people in the National Guard feel good about what they're doing, the fact that they're making a significant contribution and being able to do that, and that the morale is good. The sacrifice is great, but the morale is good. And I mean, our country, I believe, our country's at war. I think we have been in a new type of war, an asymmetrical war. That
Can you
is-
define what that means?
well, asymmetrical means there are no boundaries. It is 360 degrees. It's all around you. What we're seeing in Iraq and Afghanistan, and the way forces are fighting, like Hezbollah in Lebanon, I think are examples of what asymmetric warfare is. You don't have a uniformed force out there necessarily, and you don't have a state-sponsored force. You have state-sponsored forces, I should say, but not homegrown state-sponsored forces that are supported by government. We have been working and preparing for asymmetric warfare for some time. But this is a new evolution in warfare, and we're, of course, transforming our army into a modular army, more expeditionary, more agile, capable of moving around. Our National Guard's going to be fully modernized. We're not going to have the same kind of resourcing that we've had in the past, where the active army, first to fight, kind of got the equipment, and then the National Guard was a strategic reserve. The National Guard is now considered an operational reserve, and it is going to have this. Our brigades are going to look just like the active duty brigades in organizing and equipping, and that's where we're going. In fact, here in New York, we've already reorganized our brigade, 27th Brigade, and our 42nd Division headquarters has already been transformed into the new modular design. So we're moving along in this area.
Okay. Certainly in 1965, when you joined the National Guard, you didn't envision where you are today. How do you think being in the Guard has changed your life?
Well,
Not just since 9/11. You're
right. It is I didn't. It's again. My father thought that I was an average high school student. That I probably would be good for me to get in the military and have the discipline and so on and so forth. I didn't envision it that way, but there was some kind of a flame lit early on when I became a commissioned officer, and we can go through the whole discussion on leadership at some point, but our leaders made or born type of thing. I think there's a mixture of things there. I think you have potential, and I think that potential gets drawn out by experience and education and training, and I think that I had leadership potential, and I was able to fulfill it. Whether that could have taken place in industry, I had designs on being a phys ed teacher. I thought that's what I wanted to be, and who knows, what career path I had chosen, but I love teamwork. I love team sports. I've always played sports when I was in school, and enjoy sports to this day. And so teamwork was always fascinating. I always got a lot of enjoyment out of accomplishing something together with someone else. Individual awards are great, and those kinds of recognitions come along, I think based on how you perform with the team. I mean, that's just my personal viewpoint of these things, and there's no bigger fraternity, there's no organization that has that is a team of teams like the Army. And I think I just got inside this system, and I was able to realize the full potential, and certainly circumstance And timing has a lot to do with doors opening and closing, and I've been blessed, absolutely blessed. From a standpoint of getting opportunity, number one, people having confidence in me to you know, not only choose me for the assignment, but you know, give me responsibility like we just had in Iraq is very fulfilling. And of course, but there's the responsibility of getting that done, and so it's always challenging. So I have found it extremely rewarding, and I think it's been an environment where I've been able to, you know, realize my potential, and given the effort, the hard work, and accepting that responsibility, you can move on, and great things can happen.
Okay, well, thank you very much for your interview.
Mike, that was great.
Okay.
Appreciate it. I appreciate the opportunity to get, you know, not only some of the personal stuff on tape, but a little bit of that run up for the division and kind of get that on the record. We're working hard at trying to capture this part of the division's history and do it justice, you know, with the World War I and II guys, and of course all the National Guard guys that, you know, the division that graced the division from 1947 on. So everybody that wore a rainbow patch should share in it and feel good about it.
Okay.
I appreciate it.
Thank you.
I appreciate the museum.